Monsters coming down the hall, spires cover all the walls. Serial killer is on the line, wants to know if you have the time. Aliens are landing soon, this will mean certain doom. A chainsaw sputters and comes alive, blood and death are close behind. One thing you can be certain of, the zombies just can't get enough. Just one more bite is all they want. The ghosts downstairs are on the hunt. The Shade Chronicles are keeping score, that's what all the writing's for. They record their stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Welcome to the Shade Chronicles, an anthology-style podcast featuring short works of fiction and serial prose, specifically with a sci-fi and horror flavor. Your hosts for the podcast are Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey.
Hi, this is Derek Leftridge.
Hi, this is Lawrence Trokey, and thank you for spending your time with us. Let's get started with our first story.
The Shade Chronicles are keeping score, that's what all the writing's for. They record their stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Three Views by Derek Leftridge. With a gleam of sweat on his forehead, Matt steps back. He leans against the stone wall of the cellar, and he takes a deep breath. He takes a second deep breath and looks down at the person on the floor bleeding, gurgling for air and dying. The smell of acrid sulfur is in the air, and Matt, who has closed his eyes, opens them again, turns his head sideways, and grows a smile as he admires his recent work. Matt steps towards the person on the floor, right next to the person's head, puts a toe of his boot down on that person's neck. He leans forward and presses down. As they writhe for a few seconds, they take one labored breath and then go still. Matt, in a low voice, almost to himself, says, "Now you are dead. There is one less monster in this world to avoid and worry about." From upstairs, Matt's grandmother, Marjorie, hears and almost feels the crack of the gunshots from the basement. Marjorie, who has glaucoma so bad she can hardly see, tries as quickly as she can to get out of her ancient recliner and make her way to the basement door. On the way to the door, Marjorie bumps into the wall a few times since her balance seems to be off more than usual today. As Marjorie gets to the basement door, she yells, which comes out as an odd growl since she is concentrating on her balance so she does not fall. Marjorie calls out Matt's name as she opens the basement door. Suddenly her legs give out as she makes her first step across the threshold to the basement stairs, and she slides down all 10 steps head first and stops with a slight thump on the basement floor. Marjorie raises her head and begins to push herself up, but her left arm is not helping because it is limp and most likely broken from the fall. She manages to roll over onto her back and gets into a seated position. Matt quickly looks behind him and can see his grandmother sitting on the basement floor about 8 feet from him, close to the end of the stairs. He takes one last glance at the individual he just killed and slowly turns to walk towards his grandmother. She looks at him with cloudy eyes, blood gushes at the spot on her head where she hit her head, and a dangling left arm just hangs there, and she screams at him so hard that spit flies from her open mouth. Matt cannot determine exactly what she is screaming, but knows she is not happy. Matt begins walking to his grandmother and gets temporarily blinded by the sun coming in the basement windows, but he can still see his grandmother's face as a mix of anger and fear as she reaches out to him desperately. Matt's next-door neighbor, who is located behind his home, Casey, is stirred from a morning nap on her couch by the distant sound of the gunshots. Casey and Matt's home share a large backyard that is not divided by a fence, so this makes seeing into each other's home easier. Casey, or Karen as her neighbors call her behind her back, decides, I must go casually investigate this. Casey rolls towards the front of the couch and puts her thick stubby legs off the couch and onto the floor. Casey gets to her feet and realizes her foot is asleep and she cannot feel her full weight on it. This is a concern since Casey is a full-size woman and would like to walk and snoop on what is going on at her neighbor's place. After trying for a few seconds to get feeling back in her foot, Casey decides to give up and start hopping on one leg to her back porch. As Casey gets to her kitchen and leans to rest on the kitchen counter island, she sees her jacket and her binoculars hanging on hooks by the entrance to the porch. She's starting to feel a bit nauseous and dizzy and blames it on the diet she is not on, but as she says, testing of faith produces perseverance, and no one knows what she is talking about. Casey limps to the row of hooks and holds onto the wall as she makes her way. She puts her jacket on, because her old arms get cold outdoors, and puts the binocular strap around her neck. She takes a labored breath of air and limps onto and across the back porch. Struggling to make it through the sliding glass door sideways because of her size and leg issue, Casey stumbles to the railing of her deck, quickly stables herself, and looks through the binoculars towards Matt's house. She scans the back of Matt's house from left to right, looking at the second floor bedroom windows, but she sees nothing out of the ordinary. She then focuses on the first floor and going left to right, sees the kitchen window, then the deck and back porch window and doors, and then the other windows on the first floor, but sees nothing. As Casey moves back to the left to start her surveillance again, she drops her view and sees the basement windows. As she focuses on the first one, she sees nothing, but in the second one, she sees Matt walking in the direction of the basement door that leads to the stairs up to the backyard. Casey decides to make her way down the deck to her backyard to get a better view of Matt and or call out and get his attention. She leans onto the railing to support her foot and can feel it move and creak from her weight. She successfully makes it to the grass, pulls up her binoculars, and focuses on Matt's basement door and steps. Matt is walking backward up his basement steps to the yard and pulling something in a tarp. Then he stops to get a better grip and an arm falls out of the wrapped tarp. Casey sees all this, drops her binoculars, and begins to limp run across the yard towards Matt, yelling at the top of her lungs in anger and fear, with the mission to rip out his eyes because he has shot someone and it might be her friend, his grandmother. Martin, who lives 3 houses down from Matt and Casey, abruptly comes to because of the distant yelling. From another daytime drinking binge, he thinks he started about 6:15 a.m., but not sure. He remembers the first time he started day drinking was when he first got the internet and saw a t-shirt for sale with the saying, "It is 5:30 somewhere." He took the message as coming from a higher being telling him how to live his life. So this justified eggs, bacon, toast, and a tumbler of hops and barley for breakfast, followed by more and more hops and barley. Martin thought his awakening was caused by the neighbors coming home and shutting their car door or a non-planned fart from his innards, but that was not it. It was a scream. He realized this because it has not stopped even after he has awakened, and he can still hear it in intervals. Martin throws off the soiled sheet he was covered up with in bed, ironically farts, but thank goodness did not crap himself this time, pushes up off the bed, and walks quickly to his kitchen. Martin settles up behind his telescope that faces out the kitchen window. He tries selling himself as an avid astronomer to neighbors, but most everyone knows he likes to peek into neighboring windows and check out their outside activities when they're all outside. He moves the telescope to his right to where the screams are coming from and sees Casey, who lives a few houses away from him, struggling to run towards the house behind hers. Martin moves the telescope to the left and sees the neighbor, he assumes, dragging something from his basement to the backyard. Curious, and of course very nosy, he quickly walks to a side door that leads to his driveway and backyard to get a better look, and then realizes his fly is open. His first thought is, what was he doing when he passed out that most recent time? His second thought was to make sure to not zip his member up again and make sure to tuck in his t-shirt before heading outside. Once getting to his yard, Martin stumbles over to his fence and gets up on the bottom support to see over. He sees Casey about 2 feet away from the back neighbor. The neighbor swings his right arm, which has something in it, and barely misses Casey's head. At the same time, Martin hears something whistle past his left ear, and for a second, he thinks it's a bee, but then he sees Casey's right shoulder jerk and explode with smoke and red liquid. Martin impulsively turns his head around to face where the whistle came from and is met with a quick, piercing pain on the right of his forehead, followed by nothing as the left of his head blows out. Matt ducks down after seeing something hit Casey's right shoulder, causing her to fall to her left, followed by a gunshot a few houses to his left. As Matt stands upright, and before he can look to see where or who the gunshot came from, Casey has already gotten up to her feet, or more like her foot since she cannot feel the other, and begins to make a lunge towards Matt, who is just now realizing Casey is about on him. Matt's breathing stops as he hears the crack of a gun and feels liquid and matter spray onto his face, causing him to close his eyes. Quickly he opens his eyes, and with a bit of a blurred vision from the attack on his face, he sees a headless Casey withering on the ground. At the same time, he hears something on the right side, and it's a guy hurdling the side fence into his backyard, carrying an M24 sniper rifle, hauling ass towards Matt. Over the radio in the stealth helicopter hovering over Matt's backyard, a voice announces, "Corporal, McGee here." A response by the helicopter comes over McGee's headset. "Report, Boots 1. "Sir, all deadheads in this area have been neutralized," McGee responds. The helicopter responds, "Great to hear, Boots 1. I like the new nickname for the filthy zombies. Do you have a threat there in front of you?" Looking at Matt and replying to his radio, McGee responds, "No, sir, he is clean and will be joining the others at the base. The guy had to kill his grandfather, grandmother, and neighbor because they all had the virus today, so he will be going to medical." The helicopter voice responds, "That's a confirmative. Let the civilian know this is bad but needed and everyone clean will be okay. Set him on his way and get to the next neighborhood checkpoint. Now meet up with the other teams on the ground and get ready for the next neighborhood to clean."
Attention Shade Chronicle podcast listeners. The merchandise store is now open. You can find the merchandise store on the merchandise tab on the Shade Chronicles website, which is at theshadechronicles.com. Find premium t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, travel mugs, ball caps, and more at the Shade Chronicles podcast merchandise store. We now resume your regular programming. Apocalypse, a Love Story by Lawrence Trokey. The Book of Revelation, Chapter 13. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. John sat at his small desk in the bedroom of his apartment, which was above the bakery his family had owned for generations. From his window he could see the blue waters of the southern Aegean Sea. Fishing boats bobbed slowly up and down in the water, and seagulls could be heard calling overhead as they circled the boats, looking for anything to eat. It was going to be a warm, sunny day, but there was a constant breeze blowing in off the water that cooled the area along the beach. John opened his window to let in the sea breeze and get some fresh air. He sat down at his desk again, opened his laptop computer, and sipped coffee while he started his day going through emails and checking his favorite social media sites. This is how it was most days. He'd spend an hour or two at the computer, then he would go downstairs and help in the bakery till it was time to close. Not really an early riser, he would let the staff of the bakery open the shop and prepare the day's baked offerings, while he slept in till a more civilized hour, as he would put it. He wasn't much of a morning person. His father would have been critical of this if he had been alive to see it. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, leaving John the sole heir of his estate with the ownership of the bakery. His father was always an early riser, and being a baker suited him. He found it to be an honorable living and was proud of his occupation. John felt his father wanted him to be more like he was, and he tended to be a bit pushy about it. However, John didn't resent his father for being like this. He knew he loved him and that he was only trying to do what he thought was best for him to prepare him for life. The one thing, though, that he did not dare ignore was his daily training regimen. His father would not stand for it. This was a sacred duty they had been given, passed down from generation to generation, spanning millennia. Over 2 millennia, in fact. At 10 in the morning sharp, after his father had attended to his customers at the bakery, He would let the staff run the shop while he and John went to their secret location on the northeastern side of the island to train for the apocalypse. They boarded a skiff with an outboard motor and sailed along the coast for 20 minutes or so. There was a small tidal island just a couple of miles off the coast that would only be reachable during low tide. When the tide was at its lowest, this peninsula of sand and rock would emerge from the sea. All other times, it was covered by the ocean by a few feet. It was the perfect secret training spot since it was only there some of the time and hidden the rest. When they finally reached it, they would pull the boat ashore and moor it, and then venture inland to the waterproof crate that stored their gear. His father would train John in archery, hand-to-hand combat, strength training, endurance, edge weapons combat, and stealth techniques. John thought the weapons training was a bit dated and that they should have included modern weaponry in the mix, but his father insisted they stay true to the methods that he himself had received from his father, and his father did before him, and so on. They could trace the practice all the way back to the originator of the secret clan, John of Patmos, also known as John the Elder, the author of the Book of Revelation. After John was exiled on Patmos by the Roman Emperor Domitian in the late 1st century and wrote about the vision he had for the second coming and tribulations to precede it, a secret council was called by Clement of Rome. In it, they decided they needed to be ready for the ultimate fight of good and evil, so they formed a covert clan of warriors who would confront the Antichrist, aka the Beast of the Sea, or just the Beast for short, and his evil minions when the time came. They would prepare the way for the Lord's return by stopping the beast and saving the church. Initially, this clan was to be a mighty army, but due to endless persecutions of the early church, the clan was eventually whittled down to a single bloodline, that belonging to John of Patmos. John was the descendant of the author of Revelation, 84 generations removed. Each generation trained and waited for the appearance of the Antichrist to emerge on the world stage. When he finally arrived, the mission was simple: kill him. As time stretched on, the failure of any such figure to arrive took a toll on the clan's motivation to continue. But then someone would pop up in history that would seem to fit the criteria of the Antichrist, which reinvigorated the clan for a time. People like Napoleon or Hitler would certainly tick off many of the boxes for such a figure. The clan would send assassins to dispatch the tyrant, but oftentimes with limited success. Then they would realize their mistake and fade back into the shadows to watch and wait for the real one to appear. And now the bloodline was down to just a single warrior. His father had hoped for more children, but John's mother died when she was young, and his father never remarried. Taking care of John in the bakery consumed all of his time. John's father did encourage him to find a suitable mate to ensure the bloodline would continue, as well as their mission, but John struggled to find someone he really connected with enough to be serious about. Plus, he didn't want to marry and have children just for the sake of their mission alone. This worried his father, and they had several discussions about it over the years. Now that he was gone, John would have liked to honor his father's wishes, but he still felt the same way about it. Besides, he sometimes thought it might be best to let the bloodline die out and release the next generation from the burden of waiting for the apocalypse. Lately, he often thought about leaving Patmos, where he was born and lived all his life, along with the mission, and finally living the life he wanted to live. Maybe out in the world, he could find someone he clicked with. Maybe even fall in love and start a family. His mind drifted, considering the possibilities as he gazed out his window, watching the surf roll in over the beach. He was brought abruptly out of his daydream by a notification on his computer. It took him a moment to register what it was. After staring at it for several moments, he was having trouble comprehending what he was seeing. He didn't want to believe it. The notification summoned him again, and he clicked on the link. An encrypted message began downloading to his computer. It took a minute or so to download, then it was ready to be opened by the decoding software that resided on his computer. He opened it in the software, and it processed the message. It was a video message. He opened it in his video player and held his breath. An image he had seen only once before filled the screen. It was an image he was told to memorize as part of his training so many years ago. The next time he would see it, if ever, was when he was being activated to begin the mission he had trained for. It was an image sent from the Vatican by the Pope himself. "John," his Holy Father said, "this fateful hour is upon us. I pray to God to give you courage and strength as you take up this urgent task. Father D'Angelo will brief you on your mission details. God bless you, my son." The image shifted from that of the Pope to a white-haired priest who wore a grim expression. "John, your target is this woman. Her name is Caesarisa. She has been elected the Secretary General of the United Nations." A woman's image filled the screen, and John was taken aback. She was lovely, with dark flowing hair, full ruby red lips, and large green eyes. He had never seen anyone like her before. She had to have been the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life. At this moment, she is consolidating her power among the political elites in the world. We predict that within 2 years, she will have total influence over the world's governments, and then the tribulation for the church will begin. You will need to stop her before she carries out her plans. John was shocked that his target was a woman. He never expected this. Not that he was being sexist, well, maybe a little, but the possibility was never even discussed in his training with his father. They just assumed the Antichrist would be a man. "You have most everything you need to complete your mission. What you lack is financial backing, which we will provide to you. You know the location of the secret cache we have hidden for you, and you will find more than enough funds to finance your operation. I pray for you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Godspeed, John." Father D'Angelo crossed himself and then ended the message. John sat in his room staring at the computer for several minutes. The image of the woman remained on his screen, and he was transfixed by it. Elia Caesarisa was in her office at the United Nations headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. She was going over secret reports supplied to her by the dark network of spies and operatives, which was built over the last 2 millennia to bring about the end of the world in an all-out fight against good and evil. And she was completely and utterly bored out of her mind. Even though she was groomed for this position from birth, there was something about it that did not appeal to her. It wasn't the fact that she was on the side of evil, or that she was about to be the leader of an effort to descend the world into darkness and chaos. She was okay with that for the most part, she thought. It was all the logistics and technical planning, the endless political maneuvering, and the power brokering that she had no patience for. Dealing with the mundane details of taking over the world was just not her thing. Her handlers sensed this some time ago and reported their concerns to their master, but he dismissed it, saying that she would come around eventually. She just needed time to adjust to the new responsibilities of her position. Once that happened, she would be fine. After that, they all just went about their business hoping things would pan out with her as expected. Groaning, she shoved the stack of reports into her drawer and laid her head on her desk. She needed a break and thought about taking a jog in the park nearby. Just then, she got a notification on her computer that was marked urgent. It seemed all the notifications lately were urgent. Annoyed, she clicked the link, and a gruesome-looking individual's face filled the screen. "What is it, Diamos? I'm very busy right now," Elia said to the screen. "My apologies, Mistress Caesarisa. The Master instructed me to inform you when we had information regarding the Vatican's assassin. I need to brief you on the latest intelligence," Diamos explained. "Not another briefing," Elia moaned internally. She decided to go ahead since Diamos was under orders to do so from the Master himself. "Very well. Thank you, Mistress. Our spies in the Vatican have learned the Pope has activated the assassin from Patmos. I will display his image for you now." The screen switched from Diamos' grim countenance to that of John's. It took Elia by surprise at first. She did not think the Pope's warrior would be so handsome. "According to our intelligence, he has left the island by boat and is making his way along the southern European coast to the north. He just passed through the Corinth Canal in Greece yesterday. We believe he plans to sail all the way to Geneva by entering the Rhone River system at Port St. Louis de Rhone in France, where it meets the Mediterranean Sea. The trip should take him approximately a week to complete." Diamos showed the route they believed John would take to reach Geneva. "Why by boat? Why not fly?" Elia asked. "We believe he has hidden compartments on his vessel that he will use to smuggle weapons and supplies into Europe, so he can carry out his mission." "To assassinate me, that's his mission, right?" Elia asked. "Yes, Mistress. Fear not, for we will stop at nothing to keep him from reaching you," Diamos started to say, but was cut off. "Let him come. Do not stop him. I will deal with him directly," Elia ordered. "But, Mistress, we cannot risk him hurting you." She cut him off again. "You forget yourself, Diemos. I am quite capable of taking care of myself. Monitor his progress, but do not kill him or stop him from arriving in Geneva." She closed the lid of her laptop, ending the conversation. She knew Diemos would report what she said to the master, but she didn't care. She wanted to meet this assassin in person. Something about him intrigued her, other than his good looks. There was a loneliness in his eyes, she thought. It drew her to him for some reason. She wanted to see those eyes in person, to see if they would have the same effect on her as now. She knew the master would disapprove of her actions. She hoped he was too busy with other aspects of the apocalypse to feel the need to follow up with her directly. God knows she was busy enough herself dealing with allocating personnel and resources as it was. She never really wanted to be the Antichrist in the first place, but she had no choice in the matter. This was the very purpose she was born for, and she knew she had to obey the master's will. Still, if there was a way to postpone Armageddon, it might allow her a chance to figure out a way to sidestep the whole thing and move on. To where that was exactly, she had no idea, but the thought made her smile longingly at the possibility of being free of the whole goddamn thing. Maybe this assassin was the answer. Perhaps he could kidnap her instead of killing her and take her back to his island. There she could plan an escape and make the master think the assassin really did his job after all. That would stall things for at least another 20 or 30 years. Surely the folks at the Vatican could devise a way to hide her if it meant saving the world, right? She looked at her watch, wondering if it would really take him a week to arrive in Geneva. So it was more like 2 weeks before John was able to pilot the yacht into the marina at Port Wilson on Lake Geneva. There were some setbacks having to do with customs and making sure his diplomatic status appointed to him by the Vatican was legit. Then the yacht needed servicing after a rough night on the open waters of the Ionian Sea, which took an extra 3 days. After all that, though, the rest was literally smooth sailing. He spent the day checking in at the marina and securing his boat. Later that night, he began preparation for a reconnaissance mission to scope out the United Nations building and map out his plan for entering the building and finding his prey. He dressed in all black utilities and a black stocking cap. He carried a small tactical backpack with supplies he would need for his recon, not to mention weapons just in case. Just as he emerged on deck and was making his way to the gangplank, a voice called out to him, "Jesus, it took you long enough." He spun to face the voice, his right hand pushed into the backpack and found the handle of the large military knife. He was ready to take out any potential threat. The voice belonged to a woman standing on the pier near where his boat was docked. She said, "You can relax, John. I'm not here to hurt you." He walked slowly towards her. He saw in the light of the overhead lamp that she was Elia Caesaricia, his target, the Antichrist. He was stunned to see her standing there in front of him. Then, looking into her eyes, for a moment, he forgot the reason he was there. "I thought we could get a drink, just the two of us. How does that sound?" "A drink?" he repeated. He couldn't believe this was happening. "Yes, of course. Unless you just want to slit my throat right here and be done with the whole thing." Elias smiled at him. She was so beautiful. He released his grip on the knife and swung the pack onto his back. "That's it. Let's just get a drink and talk for a while." She walked over to him and took his arm. They walked out of the marina together and found a lakeside bar close by. They got a table near one of the large plate glass windows overlooking the lake and the marina. The lights of the marina and nearby buildings glistened on the waters of the lake, creating a sparkly, star-like backdrop for him. The waitress brought a glass of wine for her and 3 fingers of bourbon neat for him. He took a healthy draw on the bourbon and then set it down on the table. John posed the question that was in his mind since he saw her on the dock. "Why did you come here? If you know who I am and why I'm here, why would you come find me?" "I have a proposition for you. I wanted to discuss it with you to see if we could come to an understanding." She smiled at him again. She found it easy to do with him and liked the way it felt. She looked into his eyes and saw the thing again that fascinated her as before. She was glad that it was really there and not part of her imagination. "Okay, what is it?" John started to fear that this was some sort of setup. Maybe she was luring him into lowering his defenses, and then she would attack. He saw her smiling at him again, and suddenly he didn't care anymore. "What if you took me back to your island, and we asked the Vatican to help us hide me from my people, and make the whole thing look like you succeeded in your mission?" She sipped her wine and held her breath. hoping he would respond positively to her proposal. John let the idea sit there for a moment. Was she serious? Wasn't she the Antichrist? Didn't she want to carry out her master's plan to battle the forces of good for control of the world? Why would she want to abandon all of that since she was bred for that very thing? How can you walk away from your calling like that? John finally asked. She smiled again. Being the Antichrist is not all it would seem. Not nearly as glamorous or glorious as I hoped. And there's so much paperwork, you wouldn't believe it. John studied her face, looking for any signs of deceit. Her big, bright eyes held an anxious look, like she was worried about what he might say. And then there was something else, something that made his heart beat faster. Her mouth was slightly opened as though she was about to say something else. John couldn't wait to hear what it was. Aaliyah took a chance and slid her hand across the table to his. Her fingers moved across his hand, and he, in turn, took her hand and held it softly. "So what do you think?" she said, and John heard the nervousness in her voice. It was the first time since they met that she sounded vulnerable. He leaned across the table and kissed her. She responded in kind. They left the bar and went back to the yacht. They spent the rest of the night there. Aaliyah awoke in the captain's cabin and realized the boat was moving. The sun beamed in brightly through the windows. She didn't know what time it was, and since she had destroyed her phone before meeting John, so she couldn't be tracked, she had no way of checking it. She got up and dressed, then made her way to the deck where she found John in the flybridge piloting the yacht. She climbed the ladder, and John smiled at her when he saw her. "We have been sailing for about 4 hours, heading down the Rhone towards the Mediterranean Sea. We'll be there soon. From there, we will head east along the coast to Italy, and then eventually to Rome. The Vatican is expecting us." He poured her a cup of coffee from a thermos. She quietly sipped her coffee and considered their situation. She wasn't sure how long before she would be missed at the United Nations. Maybe another 2 or 3 hours, and then they would try her cell phone. When they can't reach her that way, they'll dispatch someone to her apartment. It won't be long after that before the master will be contacted. The real search won't start for at least 5 hours from now. "How long before we arrive in Rome?" she asked. "With good weather, we can make it in about 15 hours at our current speed," John replied. "John, we have spies in the Vatican. How secure was your communication with them?" Aaliyah asked, trying to calculate their odds of actually getting to Rome before being found. "My contact is a priest who is part of the program and who has direct access to the Pope. There shouldn't have been anyone else in the loop. Are you worried about our security?" John turned away from the controls and put a hand on Aaliyah's arm. "They will be hunting us in a few hours. I'm certain they will intercept us before we get to Rome." John thought about this for a moment. From a tactical standpoint, they would be very exposed on the water. And while he did upgrade some of the weapons he kept in his cache, he was certain they would be outgunned too. A plan started to come together just then, and he put the yacht on autopilot and went down to the main cabin. Aaliyah stared out across the water, and as much as she tried, she could not enjoy the beautiful day it turned out to be. The yacht had just passed the Italian city of Albenga when 2 black helicopters approached it from behind. In front of the yacht, 2 speedboats were fast approaching as well. Amos was on one of the boats with the 3-man assault team. He called over the radio to the yacht. "Calling the Apollo, calling the Apollo. This is the Dagger. Repeat, this is the Dagger. Turn off your engines and prepare to be boarded." The radio crackled with static, and then a response came. It was Aaliyah's voice. "Stand down, Amos. The assassin has threatened to kill me if you try to board. He has wired the yacht with explosives." Amos looked at the pilot and ordered, "Keep going. He is bluffing. He could not have possibly." Just then the yacht exploded. The shock wave threw the Dagger back, and it caused it to roll over violently. The Amos was killed in the crash. The other boat performed an emergency turn to avoid the explosion, but did no better. It too rolled over and sank in the sea. The helicopters pulled up and began circling the area. The pilot of one of the helicopters notified the Coast Guard. It would take several days for the Coast Guard to recover and examine the wreckage. Their initial report was that the yacht exploded due to an incendiary device being activated in the fuel tank, which was full at the time. Human remains were found in the wreckage, 1 male and 1 female. The DNA results were going to take several weeks to come back, so confirming the victims' identities was just not possible at the moment. Nix, Amos' replacement, was on a video chat with the master, conveying the latest information. After he finished, he waited for further instructions in silence as the master parsed through everything he had been told. How could Aaliyah have been so easily captured by the assassin? Why didn't he kill her, if he could, instead of risking her fighting back and escaping? She was a mighty warrior in her own right, trained in the deadly arts, and could have fended off an attack by a single assassin. Why take the chance of her getting the upper hand at some point? Could Aaliyah have been drugged or incapacitated in some way which made it possible for him to kidnap her? Still, why not just kill her, since that was the mission of the assassin, according to the spies he had in the Vatican? Maybe the fools of the Vatican thought they could use her to get to him? The thought was ridiculous and almost made him smile. He continued to stew on the matter for several minutes while Nix waited patiently. Finally, he said, "Inform me of any new information when it's available." And then he cut the feed before Nix could acknowledge the order. They waited in an interior office in the Vatican that was closed off to the public and just about all the staff there. The only individuals allowed in the area were members of the Swiss Guard, and even then, there were only a handful of the guards who were allowed this deep in the Vatican. The security was for the Pope's safety, of course, but there were also other things in this part of the Vatican that the Church wanted as few eyes to see as possible. Deep secrets for the ages that will never see the light of day before the end of the world. They were brought into this place through a secret entrance, so no one really knew they were there. Once they had a chance to clean up and refresh themselves, they would have an audience with a Holy Father who was apprised of the situation. At the far end of the office was a very ornate armchair that was mounted to a small platform, which elevated it above the height of the other furniture in the room. The Pope entered the room and went straight to the chair. John and Aaliyah stood. The Pope sat and motioned for them to do the same. He dismissed the Swiss Guard, to their surprise, but they obeyed his command. "So this is it," the Holy Father said, referring to Aaliyah. "The beast of the sea, the one predicted by your ancestor, John?" "Yes, Father, she is the one," John replied. "A female, no?" the Pope asked, seeming somewhat confused. Aaliyah responded, "It was thought a female would throw off the other side and hide our true intentions." "And now you don't want to take over the world, eh?" the Pope asked rather suspiciously. "I never did. It was what I was bred to do, but I am still a human being with free will, and I chose a different path," Aaliyah explained. The Pope considered this and stared at her for a few moments. John shifted in his chair, starting to get anxious about the situation. "Do you know the story about the frog and the scorpion?" If either did, they did not say, so he continued. "A scorpion asks a frog to carry it across a river because it cannot swim. The frog is afraid of being stung, of course, but the scorpion promises not to do it because they would both drown if it did. Reluctantly, the frog agrees to carry the scorpion across. Midway across the river, the scorpion stings the frog. The dying frog asks the scorpion why it stung him, and the scorpion replies that it was its nature to do so." Aaliyah tried to smile and said, "Sir, I understand your skepticism, but I want to—" The Pope cut her off by producing a pistol from under his robes. "A scorpion does not change its nature. You were born and bred to be a scorpion, no?" John stood up, his hands in front of him, pleading, "Holy Father, please, she really isn't what you think. Please give her a chance to explain." "Is she not the Antichrist? Is she not the very thing that we have fought and died to stop, her and her kind? She is the abomination of desolation, standing in the holy place, as Scripture predicted. She must be stopped at all costs. And if you will not do your duty, John, then by all that is holy, I will." He raised the pistol and fired. John moved to protect Aaliyah, but she was faster and pushed him out of harm's way. The bullet struck her in the chest and she fell forward. The Pope rose from his seat and walked towards her, ready to finish the job. John held Aaliyah's head, tears streaming down his face. Just as her life was fading, she said, "I would have loved to see your island." Then she died. John screamed in anguish and rage. He gently laid her head on the floor and stood up. He swatted the pistol out of the Pope's hand and grabbed him by the neck. The Pope looked wide-eyed in horror into John's face as John broke his neck and threw him aside. He went back to Aaliyah and kneeled down next to her. He gently stroked her hair as he stared into her lifeless eyes. He leaned down and kissed her on the forehead, and then he left. News of the Pope's death was all over the media the next day. Apparently he had died of natural causes, according to the press release from the Vatican. John had escaped being captured at the Vatican. His training allowed him to find a way out without raising alarm. The inner space of the Vatican, where the horrible scene played out, was quite soundproof and had no surveillance measures, so the Swiss Guard were not alerted to anything happening. They would check on the Pope after an hour to make sure everything was fine, and that's when they would discover their bodies. Of course, they cleaned up the mess and made sure no one knew what really happened. His heart ached for the loss of Aaliyah, but he knew it was a foolish thing to have hoped for. They never would have found peace and would have been constantly on the run. At least now she was truly free of her burden, and so was he. A few months after he established himself in an undisclosed tropical locale, he was on the beach packing up his small dinghy he used for fishing when he was approached by someone. The man was in an all-black suit, which was strange to see on the beach, especially since it was a rather warm day. He managed to approach John without him detecting it, which also was strange. Despite the warm weather, the man did not appear to be affected by it. He was not sweating. John stood to face the man. He did not know him and was thinking that his time had finally run out when the man said, "Well, I hope it was worth it. If you only knew how much trouble you caused me, you'd be shitting your pants right now at the thought of what I could do to you for all the grief you've given me. But I guess in hindsight, you did me a favor by rooting out a potential problem with one of my key employees. If she was really looking for a way out, I would have had to deal with it at some point. Besides, you took out the Pope, which was really some evil shit, I gotta say. And consider the source on that one." "Are you here to kill me?" John asked, ready for the answer he expected. "Why would I want to kill you? It wouldn't do me any good now, and despite my reputation, I'm really not that bad of a guy." He smiled at his own sense of humor. "No, I guess I wanted to meet you and see you face to face, and to say thank you. Also, I wanted to warn you to stay out of my business in the future, because if we ever cross paths again..." He let the unspoken threat hang in the air. John nodded. The man turned and left John. A large black SUV drove along the beach and stopped near him. Someone got out and opened the door for him, and he got in. John watched the vehicle drive away down the beach. Epilogue. Jesus sat atop his beautiful white steed as he awaited the sound of the shofar blast, which would signal to all of the armies of heaven that the battle against good and evil was finally here. He looked magnificent in his glowing white robe, long dark brown hair with just a hint of blonde highlights, thick dark brown beard, and on his head a glorious crown that was radiant. At his side, a massive jewel-encrusted scabbard that held a mighty broadsword, which he could wield with one hand to strike down the beast and his dark armies. His mighty horse stomped with anticipation, ready to take the Lord from the realm of heaven into the war-ravaged plain of Megiddo, the site of Armageddon. The angel warriors behind him cheered, celebrated, and shouted out praises to him as they waited. Just then, an angel, smaller than the rest and not dressed for battle, but just wearing standard angel attire, approached Jesus. He was holding his hands together and trying to smile, but appeared to have some difficulty doing so. He came up to the side of the horse and looked up into Jesus' marvelous face. Jesus looked down at him and said, "Yes?" The angel said, "Lord, I'm sorry to trouble you at such a momentous occasion, but it appears we have a problem." All right, so we just finished that episode, and now we've got some stories to discuss, and the first one is 3 views, and we've got a lot going on here, a lot to unpack. There's some crazy action and violence going on, and at first it seems like it's just everything's out of control, and everybody's just running around murdering people and things. Matt starts off by killing someone. We're not even sure who that person is at the beginning, and he's taking some sick pleasure in it. So, Derek, why don't you unpack this one for us and tell us what's going on?
Yes, this is one of those that I tried to kind of go to the thing of being a twist ending, and I like those kind of twist endings, but it's actually putting you in the situation, like right in the middle of it. You're in the heat of it at the beginning. You have Matt who's...
You're thrown into it.
You're thrown into it, yeah,
right.
Yeah, real quick. You're thrown into it, and Matt is already killing somebody, and in a pretty brutal way, but I think it is explained later on in the story, but at this point, Matt is killing someone, and then you see through the eyes of his grandmother what her reaction to the whole shooting is, and you get that idea, and she has a pretty bad situation. And then, then we go through, and again, 3 views, so it's 3 views of this situation.
Right.
So
got
the
neighbor.
The first was Casey, the neighbor, who ends up getting up. We kind of see how she is, what kind of person she is, and being nosy.
Yes, definitely nosy. Now, the foot thing with the sleep, is that part of the condition that she ends up ultimately suffering from, or is that just she's just big and her foot fell asleep?
She's big, but this is the whole story. Basically, is if at the end they all end up being zombies.
Yes,
and they all end up getting killed. Basically,
right.
Matt at the beginning is killing a zombie, and we find out at the end it was actually his grandfather.
Right,
and then his grandmother comes to check it out. She's already a zombie, so she's unstable. So it's my thought of what these 3 zombie people would be in their minds, in the sense of maybe they're not just completely crazy. Maybe they just have the last thoughts that they had whenever they were dead, but then their bodies won't function with them, and they can't move around right. And
so
then
the bodies are decaying.
You're seeing this,
or
foot's
failing.
decaying, eyes are decaying.
Gotcha.
Still got a curiosity and still got a hunger to go towards something or whatever like that.
Right.
But just trying to, in a sense, I guess, kind of misleading. I'm trying to mislead you to a point, but then also kind of show you that, if you look back at it, this is what they are seeing. This is what they are feeling to a point. Who knows?
And the thing that threw me most is it felt very human.
Yes.
Her condition. She's obviously overweight, and she's struggling with that some. And then she's got some physical impairments that are keeping her from functioning the way she should.
Right.
In reality, maybe it's some part of the decay process that's happening with her being zombified, or however you want to say it. But at the beginning, the way it's kind of presented, it just seems like she's just struggling with her humanity.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to do with all 3 of them. And then you got Martin, who's the alcoholic.
Yeah, definitely that one for sure.
He's already messed up going in there. I mean, he's pretty harmless. But
you think he's almost drunk during this thing, or he's still drunk,
Yeah.
and that's why his perception is weird and everything else.
Exactly. And then, if you go back to the beginning with the grandmother, it's like, this lady lives in this home, and she's just going to take a header down the steps and then still come back from it, even though her arm's broken.
That's weird.
So that could be kind of like, okay, as we know, zombies, they get hurt unless you...
There's
what
no
I know,
pain. There's no pain.
Unless you take their heads off, they are going to come back at you with one arm, no arm.
No pain,
Right. And then we have, at the point, then I give everybody a break by explaining, and I kind of like Martin as a character in this one. If it was further thing, I would do more with Martin, because I like his kind of regular working man / alcoholic / slob personality in a sense, but because he's just minding his own business, feels something fly by his head, looks over, and the next thing you hear is the side of his head blows out.
Right.
So that's okay. Why is Martin getting killed?
Which sounds disgusting in my mix, by the way.
So he's good. So he's dead, and then you get back to it, and some of these things are happening at the same time.
Yes.
So then you get put to the perspective that, okay, that first shot ended up doing something to Casey, and Matt is seeing this happen, and then another shot comes, and then all of a sudden the person shooting is coming towards Martin. Then you're taken to a helicopter, and then you see, this is some type of routine thing that they're doing in this neighborhood to be able to get rid of zombies. And Martin had to unfortunately kill some of his family members and his neighbor, which maybe he wanted to kill her, but who knows. And then you have the communication between the soldier and the man in the helicopter, which is his corporal, discussing what is going on, kind of giving everybody an idea of what all just happened.
Yeah, and I was just trying to look up here something I remember reading. Yeah, by Max Brooks, The Zombie Survival Guide. Have you ever read that?
I've not read it, but I heard of it.
It's very good. And your story reminded me of that.
Oh, okay.
There were elements of it that reminded me of it. Now, his survival guide is very much a how-to survive the zombie apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
But there were elements of your story that took on a little bit of his descriptive nature in terms of how this thing is playing out. So that was something that was reminiscent.
Yeah, and I think the biggest part of it for me was kind of having it says 3 views, but having a view of the situation and just getting all of the readers to be able to see what's happening, and then also being able to have everybody realize what these characters are seeing through their views.
Yeah, right. But now they're zombies.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's trickery in a sense.
Yeah, no. It was very effective and definitely a wild ride for sure.
Okay, now the next story Lawrence did was Apocalypse, a Love Story. And I got to say that was a pretty serious one to listen to. Not really the jovial or the horror or the sci-fi or whatever like that. It was actually a really good literature piece to me, and it did kind of take me to the feeling I was going back in time and then coming back and back and forth, and it was very interesting.
Sure,
I didn't expect that to come, but I did like how the characters were developed, and I did like the good and the bad getting together in a sense.
Yeah,
that was really interesting. You know, there were parts where I was like, "Oh no, that happened." You know, things like that.
Sure.
It kept my attention really well. But if you want to go a little more on that, go ahead and explain more about that.
I absolutely. So yeah, there's a lot of history in it, and it's biblical stuff for the most part, and it's a certain view of the world in a biblical way. So it's a more born again, conservative Christian view, and it's something I'm familiar with. But yeah, so if you have a view of the book of Revelation as a prophetic piece of literature, then you're going to interpret it a certain way, and that's the way I was approaching it, is that all of these things about the beast and the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place and all these things were things yet to come. A lot of current Christian academics, maybe more mainstream, and Christian academics tend to be not super religious.
Right.
They're more academic than they are religious. So they kind of look at these things as interpretations of the time that it was written in, not necessarily of future things. So for instance, the number of the beast is interpreted as Nero, the emperor of Rome, and the things that he was doing and persecuting the Christians back when he was emperor, that being more of the end times versus anything future to come. So playing with that idea, and playing with the idea of, there was an inspiration from, did you ever see the original movie? I don't know if the new ones have it in it or not, but the original movie series, The Omen.
Oh, yes.
With Damien? Yeah. So I don't remember. I think I watched the whole thing, but I don't remember. In The Omen 3, Damien is an adult, and he is the Antichrist, and he is becoming that, and he's coming into his power and that sort of thing. And as he is ready to do his thing, there are these group of, and I don't remember the movie very well, but there are these group of priests who are randomly like jumping out of the shadows with knives trying to kill him at various points throughout the. So I'm like, hey, you know, what if there was this ancient sect of warriors who were commissioned by the church to be the guard against the Antichrist and be the thing that goes after him when he pops on the scene.
Hold on, folks. I got to interrupt here. This is called comic book influence. Go ahead.
Very much so. And I got to be honest with you, there's a future project that we're hanging out there this is playing into. So then, you know, I thought about, okay, what would this warrior clan, where would they originate from? I said, well, why not make them part of the lineage of the guy who wrote the book of Revelation? And so I played around a little bit with the history of that, and that's where we came up with John being the 84th descendant of the original author of the book of Revelation, and all of that. So, and it's funny that you say it was more a serious story. I was really coming at this as being kind of funny, a comedy.
What is your humor like?
I'm twisted. What can I say?
I think what I did get from it, at the very end, I laughed.
Well, good.
Yeah, because I was like, oh, crap. But the very end was great. I liked it, and it was just like all this glory, and the editing you did was great.
Thanks.
And the sound and stuff like that. And, you know, it was just like, it just made me laugh because it was like, oh, it's not going to work out.
Well, you know, so the whole idea of the Antichrist just being, I'm not really into it. You know, so if you've ever seen Good Omens, Terry or read Good Omens, and then there was a Amazon miniseries. But Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman wrote the book Good Omens, and it's about the Antichrist and the end of the world, and that kind of thing. And it was, oh my gosh, they are so hilarious. It is such a fun story. And that's where the inspiration came from to make the Antichrist a woman and say, yeah, she's just not that into it. Or she's just so bored with the, when you think
paperwork.
About... the paperwork. And
I did get those subtle things.
The politics. And that's the other thing, being so bored with watching all the political commercials and all the political debates and stuff going on in our present time, thinking... if you had to take over the world, that's a lot of work. and throwing that on her shoulders as well. So that was the inspiration for her attitude about, this isn't as fun as I thought it was going to be. I thought I'd be taking over the world, but no, I'm here doing things in triplicate and that kind of thing. So that's that. And then we had to I love the pun of apocalypse, the end of the world, being a love story.
Yes.
So now we got to marry those two ideas together. And so why not have the guy who's committed to killing the Antichrist fall in love with the Antichrist?
Right. Yeah.
So, and of course, as you mentioned at the very end, we have the cameo of Jesus coming on the scene. And what did you think of the thing about, his flowing brown hair with a hint of blonde highlights?
Oh, yeah. It was ridiculous because it was just like, it's just so over the top, and it's like Fabio on a horse.
Yes,
and,
exactly. That was the image, yeah.
And it's just like, he's so cocky and whatever like that. And, no, I don't care what anybody's religion is, but it was just using that character, and just all of a sudden, it's going to crap the bed.
Right.
It was great to see.
Sir, we have a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, again, this idea of modern Christianity painting Jesus as a white man. I'm just saying he's a Mideastern person.
Right.
And definitely doesn't have the white male characteristics that we keep imagining him as.
Right.
Yeah, so it was just a fun little romp, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was fun to write.
Yes.
Well, that wraps up episode 17, and we've got one more episode to come, and that one is our Christmas episode. And if everything works as it's supposed to, it's a joint project that Derek and I will be working on together, and hopefully we don't kill each other in the process. And hopefully by the time that I'm telling you this, we have a preview put together for you, and that would be what's next. So enjoy. Next time on the Shade Chronicles.
You better watch out, you better not lie. You better step right, or you're gonna die. Don't mess with Santa Claus.
Carl sat at the edge of the bar and sipped a vodka and soda, desperately trying to forget the shitstorm his life turned out to be. He wore a dirty Santa Claus costume, complete with hat and fake beard, which was off his face and hanging down by the strap around his neck. He slumped on his bar stool and tried to forget about all the money he owed Jimmy Two Toes, the local loan shark and mobster who ran the illegal gambling tables Carl lost at most nights. Was it over 10 grand now? He wondered. Had to be at least that. Christ, he was fucked. Carl paid his tab, picked up his empty kettle, and slumped out the bar by way of the back exit. The exit led to an alleyway that was dark and wet from the light mist that had been falling all day. Every surface glistened with moisture and was cold and damp. Carl felt the same way. Then behind him, Carl heard a tinkling sound. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded more musical, like the jingling of bells. Was there another corner Santa collecting nearby? The nerve of the asshole thinking he could take over his territory, Carl thought. Ready to dick punch his competition, Carl rounded the corner of the building where the noise was coming from in a huff. He stopped cold in his tracks when he saw the sleigh and reindeer sitting in the middle of the alleyway. At that moment, the reindeer all stood at attention. They must have thought their Santa had returned to the sleigh and was ready to go. The sleigh lurched as the reindeer pulled hard against their reins. Suddenly, the sleigh was moving fast. Carl had fallen down on the floor of the sleigh when it lurched. He crawled up to the bench again, fighting against centrifugal force. When he was upright, his mouth dropped. The sleigh and reindeer were shooting into the sky, just clearing the nearby building rooftops.
Thanks again for listening to the Shade Chronicles. For comments or inquiries, you can contact us at shadechron@gmail.com. That's SHADECHRON@gmail.com. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also get more information at theshadechronicles.com. The Shade Chronicles podcast is the creative property of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey. Stories in this podcast were the sole creation of Derek Leftridge and Lawrence Trokey, respectively. Any attempt to replay for broadcast or distribution portions of any episode of the Shade Chronicles without the prior written consent from the creators and/or significant compensation is strictly prohibited. Shame on you for even thinking about it in the first place. Thanks again for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of the Shade Chronicles.